Asia's quiet militarization threatens to turn the region into a powder keg. Hong Kong and Shanghai's sprawling Jiangnan shipyard, workers are fitting the catapults that will separate China's rearmost and most advanced aircraft carrier from its two outdated family vessels. Once launched, the high-tech vessel will be suitable to propel airplanes into the sky at the same speed as its U.S. counterparts, another illustration of China's rapid-fire military modernization. It's a trend that's putting the entire region on edge. In recent months, global attention has been fixed on rising pressures between Taipei and Beijing, but the trouble of conflict in Asia stretches far beyond the Taiwan Strait. Across the region, countries are engaged in their own quiet arms race to avoid being left before. But experts advise that any misapprehension could lead to conflict in a region formerly riven by border controversies and old battles. In East Asia, Japan and South Korea are fleetly contemporizing their colors in response to pitfalls from China and North Korea, whose leadership is particularly sensitive to signs of military progress. Last month, after South Korea tested a new bullet, Pyongyang admonished Seoul for its reckless ambition. Meanwhile, India's increased military investment after clashes with China on their disputed Himalayan border pitfalls and flaming pressures with its longtime rival, Pakistan. Also, countries with lapping territorial claims in the South China Sea may struggle to maintain a politic status quo as Beijing aggressively stakes its claim to strategically precious shipping lanes. The region is trapped in a security dilemma, a geopolitical curl where countries constantly support their own colors in response to the growth of their neighbors' forces, said Malcolm Davis, elderly critic at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The eventuality for a major power war is adding, he said. The eventuality for a major power war is adding. The military rise of China. Under President Xi Jinping, China's service has fleetly expanded. China's People's Liberation Army, PLA, now fields the world's largest cortege, technologically advanced covert fighter spurts and a growing magazine of nuclear munitions, and the military modernization has only begun. China's military budget is growing every time, probably above $200 billion in 2021, and while it's still far below the estimated $740 billion 2022 U.S. defense budget, the PLA is closing the technological gap with the American service. Along with the third aircraft carrier being erected in Shanghai, the Pentagon claimed China lately tested a hypersonic bullet. What we saw was a veritably significant event of a test of a hypersonic armament system. And it's veritably concerning, said Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Gen. Mark Milley. China said it was not a bullet, but what we saw was a veritably significant event of a test of a hypersonic armament system. And it's veritably concerning. And it is not just China's military buildup that's unsettling the region, but its station as well. Speaking at a festivity of the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party in July, Xi said China would no longer be bullied, oppressed or pacified, and anyone who tried would bullied, oppressed or pacified. In a virtual meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden this week, Xi said China would take bent measures if separatist forces in Taiwan crossed a red line, according to a Chinese readout of the meeting. Similar moves are extremely dangerous, just like playing with fire. Whoever plays with fire will get burnt, the statement said. Over the once many times, a new strain of argumentative Chinese diplomats, nicknamed wolf soldiers, have been pushing back hard in press conferences and on social media against any perceived cuts toward China. Arzan Karapur, South Asia exploration scholar at Stanford University, said Beijing's aggressive posturing and tactfulness under Xi was startling its neighbors. This isn't just the brashness of Wolf Legionnaire, this isn't just the brashness of, he said. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has been a major patron of peace and stability in the region, particularly through its close security alliances with Japan, South Korea and the Philippines. But the trouble of a U.S. pullout from the region under former U.S. President Donald Trump, combined with his America First programs that saw the country turn inward, undermined trust in Washington's engagement in the region. Since being tagged, Biden has affirmed his commitment to the Indo-Pacific, but the trouble of the alternate Trump administration in 2024 and the chaos that redounded from the U.S. pullout in Afghanistan, has led American security mates in Asia to beef up their own colors against any eventualities, Tarapur said. I sweat there will always now be a little asterisk when indigenous countries consider the U.S., that it isn't vulnerable from domestic insecurity or strategic madness, Terrapore said. Japan and South Korea make their forces. Two of the countries with the most rapid-fire demilitarization are those geographically closest to China: Japan and South Korea. Ahead of his election pomp in October, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida promised to double the country's military budget if he was re-elected, raising it to 2% of the GDP for the first time since World War II. There's no timeline for the unknown increase, but it would allow the Japanese government to snappily expand its forces at a time when Tokyo feels under growing pressure from bordering North Korea and China. Japan lately blazoned plans to emplace further dunhams in 2022 to its Okinawa islet chain that sits just a many hundred country miles from the Chinese landmass. Experts see the deployment as an interference to any moves by Beijing against Taiwan. It has also expanded its service in recent times with F-35 fighter spurts certified or bought from the U.S., along with repurposed aircraft carriers to transport them. The country's tone defense forces are also looking to add high-tech submarines, destroyers and covert fighters to their magazine. While Japan's neighbor North Korea is frequently in the news for its bullet program, South Korea is also fleetly expanding its forces. Seoul is looking to make up its service, incompletely to make it less reliant on its longtime security mate, the United States. In September, Seoul blazoned it had successfully tested a submarine-launched ballistic bullet, SLBM, one of the first major trials since Biden agreed to end a 40-time-old convention limiting South Korea's munitions program. The limits were put in place in 1979 to help a bullet development arms race between the two Koreas. The end of the convention is another step by South Korea towards military independence, which could provoke a more violent arms race with the North. South Korea is formally planning to commission its first aircraft carrier, for implicit deployment in 2033. While both Japan and South Korea are longtime U.S. security mates, with uneasy connections with China and North Korea, they're hardly friendly. The two governments regularly disaccord diplomatically over major mortal rights abuses during the early 20th century, when Japan enthralled South Korea, and experts said neither government is likely to want the other to pull ahead too far militarily. Roughly right sect leaders in Tokyo will say, look at South Korea, it has an aircraft carrier, a full-fledged aircraft carrier, we need to have one also. As a matter of public pride, Lionel Fatton, Indo-Pacific Affairs expert at Webster University in Switzerland, said. The slow arms race. Not every country confederated with the U.S. is seeking further military independence. In a shock advertisement in September, Australia tied itself more nearly to Washington by forming a new security alliance with the US and UK in the Indo-Pacific. Under the agreement, known as AUKUS, the abettors will partake information, including US technology that could see Australia acquire its own line of nuclear-powered submarines. That would allow Australia to extend its reach into the South China Sea while also solidifying a base for London and Washington in the region. The decision made it clear that Australia was choosing the US over China, shifting the balance of the power in the Asia-Pacific. It also unsettled nations across Southeast Asia, which are floundering to maintain a cordial relationship with Beijing while guarding their own interests. Both Malaysia and Indonesia intimately raised their reservations about the AUKUS deal, with Jakarta saying it was concerned it could lead to an indigenous arms race. The U.S. Minister to Indonesia, Sung Kim, said at the time that those enterprises were unwarranted. Indonesia itself is in the midst of trying a major military modernization. President Joko Widodo called for his $125 billion investment in June, and has increased military details of the South China Sea, where China claims a huge swathe of home that overlaps areas claimed by other nations. But other heirs to the South China Sea, including Philippines and Vietnam, are floundering with their own military buildup, Auspice Davis said.